My sister stole my inheritance after I cared for our parents alone, so I took her to court and now she's losing everything she tried to steal. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and in my family, I was always the one who stayed behind while everyone else moved forward. It wasn't something anyone ever asked me to do out loud, it just happened, quietly, the way expectations settle on you when you're the reliable one. My sister left home as soon as she could, chasing her career, her freedom, her life, and every relative praised her for being so independent and so brave. Meanwhile, I stayed. Not because I didn't have dreams, but because someone had to be there when our parents started slowing down. At first, it was small things. Grocery runs after work. Driving them to appointments. Fixing things around the house when my dad's hands started shaking too much. My mom would smile and say, "You're just better at this stuff," like it was a compliment instead of a sentence. Soon, my evenings disappeared into medication schedules, insurance calls, and listening to the same worries repeated over and over in the dim kitchen light. The house always smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee, and the TV was always too loud, like it was trying to fill the silence we didn't know how to talk about. Whenever I hinted at being tired, my parents would reassure me. "Don't worry," my dad would say, patting my arm. "Everything will be fair someday." My mom would nod and add, "We know who's really here for us." Those words became my fuel. I believed them. I believed that loyalty meant something, that family kept score even if we pretended not to. My sister would call occasionally, cheerful and rushed. "I wish I could help more," she'd say, already halfway out the door of her own life. I'd tell her it was fine, because that's what I'd been trained to say. I didn't keep track of what I gave up. I didn't ask for anything in return. I trusted that my sacrifices were seen, understood, and safe. I truly believed there was no way doing the right thing could ever come back to hurt me. I didn't realize when caregiving crossed the line from helping out to becoming my entire life. It happened so slowly that by the time I noticed, there was nothing left that was just mine anymore. My mornings started earlier so I could sort pills into plastic boxes before work, and my nights ended with checking that doors were locked and breathing was steady. Friends stopped inviting me places because I always said no, and eventually they stopped asking altogether. My parents' health declined faster than anyone expected. One fall turned into 3. One doctor's visit turned into weekly appointments, then specialists, then long drives to hospitals that smelled like antiseptic and fear. I used vacation days to sit in waiting rooms, staring at beige walls and listening to the buzz of fluorescent lights. I told myself it was temporary. That once things stabilized, I'd get my life back. My sister would call during her lunch breaks, voice light and distracted. "How are they doing?" she'd ask. I'd give her the rundown, new medications, worsening symptoms, another bill, and she'd sigh and say, "I feel so bad you're dealing with all that." Then she'd explain why she couldn't come visit. Work was hectic. Flights were expensive. She was exhausted. I understood every excuse, even when it hurt. Relatives started calling me a saint at family gatherings. "Your parents are so lucky to have you," they'd say, clinking glasses while I stood there running on 4 hours of sleep. The praise felt good for a moment, then hollow. No one offered to take over for a weekend. No one asked what I needed. Being dependable meant being invisible. There were nights I lay awake listening to the house settle, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on my chest. I'd wonder what my life would have looked like if I'd left too. But then I'd hear my mom cough in the next room or my dad call my name softly, and the guilt would snap me back into place. This was my role. This was who I was. I kept going because I believed there was meaning in it. That sacrifice, eventually, would be recognized in a way that mattered. I didn't know yet that the more I gave, the easier it would become for everyone else to take, and that something far worse was quietly being set in motion. The promises were what kept me going when my body and mind were clearly past their limits. Late at night, after I'd finished cleaning up dinner and settling my parents into bed, my dad would sit at the kitchen table with me, rubbing his temples like he was trying to hold himself together. "I know this isn't fair to you," he'd say quietly. "We see everything you do. My mom would nod from across the room and add, "One day, this will all make sense. We'll make sure you're taken care of." Those conversations felt sacred. The house would be dim, the air heavy with the smell of old wood and medicine, and I'd cling to every word like proof that I wasn't throwing my life away for nothing. Inheritance wasn't talked about like money, it was framed as acknowledgement. Recognition. A quiet way of saying thank you for years of showing up when no one else did. "Your sister will understand," my mom would say. "She knows you're the one holding everything together." I never questioned it. I never asked for details. I didn't want to sound greedy, didn't want to taint something that felt rooted in trust. I assumed things were already settled, already fair. My sister's name would come up occasionally, always casually, like an afterthought. "She's busy," my dad would shrug. "Different kind of life." And that was that. I didn't document my expenses. I didn't keep records of the hours I missed at work or the promotions I turned down. When I paid bills from my own account because it was easier, I told myself it didn't matter. Family doesn't keep receipts, right? Love isn't transactional. That's what I believed, even as my savings dwindled and my world grew smaller. Looking back, I realize how much blind faith I had. I trusted words more than paperwork, intentions more than proof. I believed that being loyal meant never needing protection. Sitting there night after night, listening to promises echo off the same kitchen walls, I thought I was safe. I thought there was no way my own family would ever let me fall. I didn't know then that those promises were the only thing standing between me and a truth I wasn't ready to face, and that trusting them completely would come at a cost I couldn't yet imagine. The first red flags didn't arrive loudly. They slipped in quietly, disguised as concern, right around the time my parents' health took a sharper turn. Suddenly, my sister started calling more often. Not to ask how I was holding up, but to ask questions. Very specific ones. "Do you know where Mom keeps the paperwork?" she asked one evening. "Have you guys updated the will recently?" Her tone was casual, almost bored, like she was asking about the weather. When she visited, she walked through the house differently. Slower. Observant. Her eyes lingered on file cabinets, desk drawers, the small safe in the hallway closet. "I'm just thinking ahead," she said when I noticed. "We should all be prepared." I told myself she was finally stepping up, finally taking things seriously. Part of me was relieved. Another part felt uneasy, like I'd walked into a room where the air had subtly changed. She started making comments that rubbed me the wrong way. "I mean, you're home anyway," she laughed once, when I mentioned how exhausted I was. "It's not like you're giving up some huge career." The words stung more than I expected. I'd turned down opportunities, but I never framed them that way out loud. Hearing her minimize it made my stomach tighten. I tried bringing it up to my parents gently. "She's asking a lot about the will," I said one night, keeping my voice calm. My mom waved it off. "She's just anxious," she replied. "You know how she is." My dad added, "Everything's already handled. Don't worry." Their certainty shut me down instantly. Questioning it felt like questioning them. So I swallowed the discomfort. I told myself grief made people weird. That stress warped intentions. I reminded myself of all the promises, all the late-night reassurances that things would be fair. Still, something felt off. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. My sister would exchange looks with my parents that I couldn't quite read. At night, lying in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the walls, I felt a quiet dread settle in my chest. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to believe it meant anything. But for the first time, trust felt fragile. And I had no idea how close I was to finding out why. The loss hit us like a sudden silence after years of noise. One morning, I walked into my dad's room with his pills in my hand and realized he wasn't breathing. The house felt wrong immediately, too still, too empty, like it knew before I did. The next few days blurred together in a haze of phone calls, paperwork, and people telling me how strong I was while I felt completely hollow inside. I handled everything because no one else did. I arranged the funeral, met with the funeral director in a room that smelled like flowers and disinfectant, and nodded while he explained costs like this was just another errand. I paid deposits without checking my balance. I coordinated relatives' arrivals, picked out clothes, and stood beside my mom while she cried into my shoulder at night. My sister flew in and cried publicly, loudly, clinging to me in front of others like we were equal partners in grief. Behind closed doors, it was different. She disappeared for hours to clear her head. When people praised me for holding things together, she smiled and said, "We're both doing our best." I was too exhausted to correct her. Grief made everything feel heavier, slower, like I was moving underwater. Conversations about inheritance vanished completely. The reassuring phrases my parents used to repeat were suddenly gone, like they'd never existed. At night, after everyone left, I'd sit alone at the kitchen table where my dad used to promise me things would be fair. The chair across from me stayed empty. The silence was suffocating. I didn't question anything, not the lack of discussion, not my sister's sudden confidence, because my brain barely functioned beyond survival. I was grieving, caretaking, and managing logistics all at once. I told myself this wasn't the time to worry about money or fairness. That it was disrespectful to think about anything beyond loss. My mom leaned on me harder than ever, and I leaned back, even as my own foundation cracked. I didn't notice how often my sister whispered with her in the other room, or how frequently paperwork was moved around without me there. Looking back, that was the moment everything shifted. While I was drowning in grief and responsibility, something important was happening just out of sight. I didn't know it yet, but the ground under my feet was already starting to give way. I found the will by accident, which somehow made it hurt even more. I wasn't snooping or digging for answers, I was looking for an insurance document my mom asked me to bring to an appointment. The study smelled like dust and old paper, and I remember kneeling on the floor, sorting through folders with shaking hands because I was still so tired all the time. That's when I saw a manila envelope tucked behind a stack of outdated tax returns, labeled in my dad's handwriting. Inside was a copy of the will. Not the one I thought existed. Not the one I'd been reassured about for years. At first, I didn't understand what I was reading. My name was there, technically, but barely. A vague line about a small allocation for assistance already provided. My sister's name, on the other hand, dominated the page: primary beneficiary, control of assets, authority over the house. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The dates didn't make sense either. This version had been updated recently. After my dad's health declined. After I'd already given up everything. I confronted my sister that same evening. My hands were shaking as I held up the papers. "Why does this look like it was changed?" I asked. She barely glanced at it before sighing. "You're misremembering," she said calmly. "That's always how it was." When I pushed back, she frowned like I was embarrassing her. "You're emotional. Of course you think you were promised more." I went to my mom next, desperate. She looked tired, distant. "Your sister helped us with some things," she said softly. It made sense. The room felt like it tilted. Everything I'd been told, every promise whispered late at night, suddenly felt unreal, like I'd imagined it all. That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly. Quietly. I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding or paperwork error. It was a decision. One made while I was busy sacrificing, trusting, and staying behind. I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, my chest tight, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with my parents. For the first time, the thought crept in that maybe being loyal hadn't made me safe at all. And that thought refused to let me sleep. The moment I started asking questions, the narrative around me shifted fast. Suddenly, I wasn't the devoted son anymore, I was the problem. My sister wasted no time reframing the situation. "He's obsessed with money," I overheard her telling an aunt on the phone. I think the stress finally got to him. When I confronted her, she crossed her arms and said flatly, "You're acting entitled. No one forced you to stay." That word, forced, echoed in my head. I tried explaining myself to relatives, carefully at first. I talked about the years I gave up, the promises I'd been told, the nights I slept with one ear open in case my parents needed me. But every conversation ended the same way. You chose that, they said. Your sister had her own life. Some even accused me of trying to guilt everyone into giving me money I didn't deserve. At home, the gaslighting got worse. My sister insisted I was remembering things wrong. Dad never said that, she'd claim confidently. You're twisting it. My mom avoided eye contact whenever I brought it up, repeating, please don't make this harder than it already is. I started doubting myself, questioning conversations I could swear had happened, wondering if exhaustion and grief had warped my memory. The house felt hostile now. Rooms went quiet when I walked in. Doors closed softly but deliberately. I felt like a guest in the place I'd held together for years. At night, I replayed arguments in my head, my stomach knotted tight, my chest aching with a mix of anger and shame. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe expecting fairness made me greedy. But then I'd remember my dad's hand on my arm, his voice telling me everything would be fair. I remembered my mom thanking me for being the one we can rely on. Those memories clashed violently with the way I was being treated now, and the disconnect was unbearable. I was isolated, exhausted, and slowly losing my sense of reality. The people I trusted most were telling me I was wrong for feeling betrayed. And the worst part was realizing how easily everyone accepted that version of me, the ungrateful son, because it was more convenient than admitting the truth. By the end of that week, I stopped talking altogether. I could feel myself shrinking, retreating inward, carrying the weight alone again. But something dark was forming beneath the silence. I just didn't know yet how far everything was about to fall. Rock bottom didn't arrive with a dramatic crash. It crept in quietly, disguised as paperwork and polite conversations, until one day I realized I had nothing left to stand on. My mom passed not long after, and this time there was no buffer of shock to protect me. Just exhaustion. I handled her funeral the same way I handled everything else, mechanically, numb, signing forms with hands that didn't feel like mine anymore. A week later, my sister sat me down at the kitchen table. The same table where I'd spent years listening to promises. The air felt cold, even though it was summer. She slid a folder toward me and said, "We need to talk about next steps." Inside were documents about the house. Her house. According to the will, I had 30 days to move out. She said it gently, like she was doing me a favor. "I'll give you time," she added. I'm not heartless. I didn't even argue. I just stared at the wood grain on the table, my ears ringing. This was the house I'd maintained, repaired, paid bills for, and lived in for years. And now I was being evicted from it like a stranger. I packed my things slowly, room by room, surrounded by memories that suddenly felt like evidence of my own stupidity. Every box felt heavier than the last. I had no savings. I drained everything keeping my parents afloat. Friends were distant. Family was silent. I slept on a borrowed couch, staring at unfamiliar ceilings, wondering how I'd gone from being the good son to disposable. Some nights, I couldn't breathe through the weight on my chest. I honestly thought about disappearing, just walking away from everything and everyone. What hurt most wasn't losing the money or the house. It was realizing how completely I had been erased. Years of sacrifice reduced to a footnote. A line in a document. I felt small, ashamed, and utterly defeated. This was the lowest I'd ever been, betrayed by blood, stripped of purpose, and left with nothing but questions. But in that emptiness, something unexpected happened. As I sorted through old boxes one night, looking for anything I could sell, I found something I'd forgotten entirely. And that discovery would change everything. What I found wasn't dramatic at first glance. Just an old folder, bent at the corners, stuffed with random papers I'd thrown together years ago without thinking. Receipts. Bank statements. Appointment summaries. Sticky notes in my handwriting with dates and reminders. I sat on the floor, surrounded by half-packed boxes, and felt my heart start to race for the first time in weeks, not from panic, but from clarity. As I went through everything, patterns emerged. Transfers from my account to cover utilities. Payments for medical equipment. Emails confirming appointments I attended alone. Messages from my sister saying, "I can't help right now, thanks for handling it." There were even texts from my dad thanking me for paying a bill just this once, over and over again. I hadn't meant to keep proof, but I had. Quietly. Accidentally. The more I looked, the angrier I became. Not explosive anger, focused anger. The kind that sharpens your thoughts instead of blurring them. I started requesting copies of records from clinics, banks, and insurance companies. Every call felt terrifying at first, like I was doing something wrong, but no one stopped me. No one questioned why I was asking. The evidence stacked up faster than I expected. Then I noticed something else. Dates on the revised will didn't align with when my dad was lucid. Signatures looked rushed. One witness name showed up nowhere else in our lives. My stomach dropped as I realized this wasn't just unfair, it might be illegal. For the first time, my sister's confidence made sense. She wasn't just entitled. She thought she was untouchable. I booked a consultation with a lawyer using the last bit of money I had. Sitting in that office, the air smelling like stale coffee and paper, I felt small again, until he started flipping through my documents. He didn't interrupt. He didn't dismiss me. After a long pause, he looked up and said, "You have a case." Those words hit me harder than any promise ever had. I walked out of that building feeling something I hadn't felt in years: momentum. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't greedy. I wasn't imagining things. I'd been wronged, and there was proof. That night, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I stopped trying to be the bigger person. I stopped protecting my sister's image. If she wanted to erase me, I was going to make sure the truth replaced the silence. And once I committed to that, there was no going back. Filing the lawsuit felt unreal, like I was watching someone else live my life. Sitting in the courthouse lobby, surrounded by beige walls and the low murmur of strangers' conversations, I kept thinking, I'm really doing this. I'm taking my own sister to court. My hands shook as I signed the paperwork, not from doubt, but from the weight of crossing a line I'd been trained my entire life never to cross. The backlash was immediate. My phone lit up with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. "How could you do this to family?" one text read. Another said, "Your parents would be ashamed." My sister called me screaming, her voice sharp and furious. "You're trying to ruin me," she spat. "After everything I've done for you." I hung up without responding, my heart pounding, realizing how quickly her concern turned into rage when she lost control of the narrative. She was convinced I'd back out. At the first hearing, she smirked at me across the room, arms crossed confidently. Her lawyer spoke like this was a nuisance case, a bitter sibling dispute. But when my attorney began presenting timelines, records, and inconsistencies, the room changed. Questions were asked my sister clearly wasn't prepared for. Dates. Signatures. Payments. Her answers grew clipped, defensive. Witnesses followed. A neighbor who saw me there daily. A doctor who confirmed I was listed as primary caregiver. A bank representative who explained years of transfers. Each testimony felt like another crack forming in the image my sister had built. I watched her posture shift, her confidence falter, her eyes dart toward her lawyer with growing panic. For the first time, I wasn't the one being doubted. I wasn't explaining myself to people who'd already decided I was wrong. The truth was speaking for me, calmly, methodically, and publicly. Sitting there, listening to my life laid out in facts instead of accusations, I felt something loosen inside my chest. But the case wasn't over. The judge ordered further review, more sessions, more waiting. As we left the courthouse that day, my sister brushed past me without a word, her face tight with anger and fear. I stood there alone on the steps, the cold air biting at my skin, knowing the fight had only just begun. And deep down, I could tell she was finally realizing something she never expected. I wasn't backing down. The judgment didn't come quickly. Weeks passed, then months, each day stretched thin by anxiety and silence. I replayed every hearing in my head, every question the judge asked, every moment my sister avoided looking at me. When the call finally came, I was sitting alone in my apartment, staring at a wall that still felt temporary, like I wasn't allowed to settle in yet. In the courtroom, the air felt heavier than usual. My sister sat rigid, her confidence completely gone, fingers clenched around a tissue she kept twisting until it nearly tore. The judge spoke calmly, methodically, like this was just another case on the docket, but every word landed like a hammer in my chest. He outlined the inconsistencies in the revised will. The timing. The lack of credible witnesses. The undue influence during a period when my father's mental capacity was clearly compromised. Then he said it. The revised will was ruled invalid. I felt my breath catch as he continued. The estate would revert to the previous version. Assets would be redistributed fairly. My sister was ordered to return what she'd already taken and cover a significant portion of the legal costs. The words blurred together as relief and disbelief crashed over me at the same time. I'd spent so long being told I was wrong that hearing the truth spoken out loud felt unreal. My sister's reaction was immediate and visceral. She whispered, "This isn't fair," over and over, her voice breaking. When she looked at me, there was no apology, just shock and fury, like she couldn't understand how this had happened to her. Our relatives sat in stunned silence, the same people who'd accused me of being greedy now refusing to meet my eyes. As we stood to leave, no one spoke to me. No one congratulated me. But I didn't need them to. Validation hit harder than the money ever could. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't exaggerated. I hadn't failed my parents or myself. Outside the courthouse, the sun felt brighter than it had in years. I stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, thinking this was finally the end of it. But I was wrong. Because while the court had decided the case, the real aftermath, the consequences of what she'd done, were only just beginning. Winning the case didn't feel like triumph the way I thought it would. It felt quiet. Heavy. When the money was finally returned and the paperwork settled, I expected some rush of victory, but what I mostly felt was exhaustion leaving my body for the first time in years. Like I could finally breathe without bracing for impact. I moved into a small place of my own, unpacked slowly, and let myself exist without someone else's needs dictating every hour of my day. My sister tried to reach out once. A single message. "I hope you're happy now." I stared at it for a long time, my phone warm in my hand, the room silent except for traffic outside. I realized she still thought this was about punishment. About winning. I never replied. Not because I was angry anymore, but because I finally understood that closure doesn't come from explanations, it comes from boundaries. Some relatives quietly drifted back, pretending nothing had happened. Others disappeared completely. I let them go. I stopped trying to correct the story or defend myself. The truth had already been spoken where it mattered, and I didn't owe anyone a performance of forgiveness or reconciliation. Therapy helped me unpack something harder than the betrayal, the way I had been conditioned to believe my worth came from how much I endured. There are moments I still miss my parents. Not the illness, not the chaos, but the versions of them who once promised things would be fair. I've made peace with the fact that they were flawed, scared, and human. That acknowledgement hurts less than pretending they never failed me. Healing, I've learned, isn't pretending the damage didn't happen. It's choosing not to carry it forward. I use the inheritance differently than I imagined. Not extravagantly. Intentionally. I invest in my future, my health, my time. I say no without guilt. I rest without apologizing. I build a life where love isn't proven through self-erasure. For most of my life, I was the one who stayed behind. The one who held everything together while quietly disappearing. Now, for the first time, I'm choosing myself, and that's the one thing no one can ever take from me again.